You mentioned the sort of taking it for granted component. Literally, the question that I have here is, do the haters and losers read national media types like me take Giannis for granted? That is a sort of a veiled argument of like a veiled entry point to the MVP conversation, which everybody has their sensibility on it and their sense of what the only appropriate agenda and outcome is. I think if I was talking to somebody who primarily discussed the Mavericks, or who primarily discussed the Nuggets, or who primarily discussed the Thunder, they would have a different viewpoint on where the MVP hierarchy shakes out. Do you buy the general sense that like Giannis is making an MVP push late in the season, or do you feel like that's kind of like people are just sort of looking for something to talk about?
I mean, again, the remarkable thing about him is the consistency that he's had all year long, right? So I think certainly, like the losing to the Lakers, blowing that huge lead, AD kind of being the story of the end of that game and the overtimes, that was obviously a blow to any push that he might have been making. He obviously made a strong case in that Thunder game. I think his record in games against the other top MVP candidates, if you include Embiid, was like 5-1 or something like that. And he was, putting up monster numbers and generally had outplayed, the other MVP candidates on the opposite side. So, look, he's not the kind of guy who's going to come out like Joel has in previous years and said, like, I'm the MVP. Like, I want it. It's mine. Like, you can tell he wants a third MVP. I'm not going to say it's like not important to him. I think it is. Sure. I think the recognition he appreciates, but I think he's also wary of, begging for it publicly. Like,
sure.
I think he probably thinks it's like a little bit unbecoming to be too thirsty for that MVP. So he's probably more in the, Jokic camp than the Embiid camp in that regard. But it's funny, I was looking back, because Giannis, obviously with the amount of fouls he draws, I was curious, like, okay, well, if we take that, end of January-ish, right, when the coaching change happens, roughly, I think people have been pointing to that also when roughly maybe the rules started being interpreted, a bit more in favor of the defense. And I was kind of curious, I was like, well, has Giannis's numbers, have they dropped off a bit, right? Because if you look at Dame's numbers, his free throws are way down since that happened. His 3-point shooting has gone up, but his field goal percentage is pretty much flat. And, overall, it's kind of like, he's still kind of like really good, but not, Dame in all caps. You look at Giannis, 30 points per game on 64.5% true shooting before, 30 points per game on 66 true shooting since then, right? Again, like, you can try to game plan for him. Everybody has different versions of what you try to do to slow him down, but he's just otherworldly in his ability to, use his tools and his skill. And
cannot emphasize that enough.
In order to, he's a problem solver. I think all the best players are problem solvers, right? Like there is no way to kind of completely shut them down. And, his night to night consistency has been remarkable. So I think he just deserves a ton of credit for that. And again, I think probably part of the problem with him is, it's like the old, I forget who came up with it. If it was Bill Simmons or who came up with like the idea of like the 10% thing with Russell Westbrook, right? Like the flaws are so obvious that it negates the appreciation for what, a superstar does well. And with Giannis, obviously it's a similar story. He never magically became, a 35% 3-point shooter. His mid-range game is kind of still comes and goes. And so I think that's honestly like also a big hurdle for him is I think when people construct their MVP narratives, they want to be able to point at and say like, well, early in the year, I was like, well, Joel Embiid, like, look how much better of a passer he's become, right? Like there's this thing that like, it's almost like, we're like we're a teacher and these are our students and we're like, oh, Billy got so much better at this, or like Billy worked really hard and he did this. And, the guy who was just acing the test before and just kind of like does it because they're just naturally smart or whatever, like it's just less exciting. Like, oh, good job. Keep doing that, right? You don't really need me to teach you anything. So I think with Giannis, there's a lot of that. The fact that he's in many ways, like he's become even better by just leaning into his strengths rather than necessarily like solving his weaknesses. Like, if he was back at 75% free throw shooting this year, I think there would be a stronger MVP case or people would buy into the MVP case more. But instead he's just like, you know what, I'm just going to get even better at getting to the rim and dunking and, doing these incredible things that no one else is able to do. And I think his passing and playmaking has gotten better. You know, his assist numbers are as high as they've ever been. They're even higher if you look back at the last few months, around 7 assists a game. But again, like, I don't know, just this idea that like he's not skilled when he's this level playmaker, and some of the passes he's able to make, especially like moving up the speed, and when he's, you know, facing a defense that's, you know, throwing multiple bodies at him, is pretty incredible and remarkable. And you can tell, like, I feel like his flair for passing has increased a lot over the past year or so as well. He's always been a good passer. It's always been in his skill set. But so again, like, you know, has Giannis been making a push? Again, I feel like he's always pushing all year long. That's part of what makes him great. And I don't expect that's going to translate into hardware. And some of that's, you know, because I think Jokic, coming off a championship, you know, has sort of the championship belt, and, you know, there's probably a sense that he probably should have been MVP last year anyway. And, you know, with Shea and Luka, I think there's a novelty factor of they're kind of new to this whole like legit title MVP candidacy in the first place. So there's a lot more, you know, excitement, let's just say, from kind of those quarters of you know, fan bases to try to get their guy an MVP. So with Giannis, yeah, I mean, he's just sort of, I guess, the neglected, like, yeah, you've been doing this for 5 years and you're, you know, at this incredible level and you just keep doing it. And so we don't feel like we need to reward that. But again, I think for Giannis, you know, ultimately it's about championships now. So maybe that would be the, you know, high road, the moral high road sort of he'd be taking. It's like, well, you know, and finals MVPs are his number one priority at this point. And it's going to be really difficult to get back to the finals, let alone win another championship. But obviously, I think that's his main concern. And, you know, we'll see. I'd love to see him win another MVP, given he's been at such a high level for such a long time. But again, when that happens, unclear.